In the vast, endless steppes of Mongolia, where the wind whispers across the tall grasses and the distant mountains shimmer under the pale sunlight, a story began long ago. It is a story that moves slowly, as if the land itself carries the rhythm of time, unhurried, deliberate, gentle, yet immense in scope. In these steppes, around the year 1162, a child was born into a world of uncertainty, a world shaped by harsh winters, roaming herds, and constant conflict between tribes. This child would later be known as Temujin, a name that would come to be remembered across continents, long after the steppes had shifted, long after the mountains had stood silently, witnessing countless generations rise and fall. Temujin's early years were marked by struggle and survival. His father, a respected chieftain of a minor clan, was poisoned by a rival tribe when Temujin was still very young. The loss left his family vulnerable, abandoned by allies, wandering through cold winds and unforgiving terrain. Imagine the tents, the fires burning weekly in the endless nights, the sound of horses moving in the distance, the quiet tension of families clinging to survival. Temujin learned early that trust was fragile and that strength was necessary, not only to lead, but to endure. He was captured by a rival group at one point, held prisoner, and yet he escaped, slowly, carefully, with a mind already shaping strategies and alliances. Every step he took, every decision he made, added to the foundation of a future that would reshape the world. As he grew, Temujin began to gather followers, small at first, loyal and observant. These were not just men. They were eyes and ears, scouts and advisors, each contributing to the slow growth of power. The rhythm of life in the steppes taught patience. Strategy was woven with the observation of seasons, of the migration of herds, of the behavior of rival tribes. The winters were harsh, the summers brief, and yet the steppes held secrets, lessons that only those who listened closely could learn. Temujin listened, watched, waited. He formed alliances with neighboring clans, often through negotiation, sometimes through marriages, occasionally through conflict. Each action was deliberate, measured, thoughtful. By 1206, the scattered Mongol tribes, weary of conflict among themselves and recognizing Temujin's vision and skill, gathered in a great assembly. They recognized him as the supreme ruler of the united Mongol people and bestowed upon him the title Genghis Khan, meaning universal leader. In that moment, the steppe winds carried whispers of unity, of a force that could extend far beyond the plains. Genghis Khan was not a name that promised comfort or ease. It was a name that suggested movement, expansion, relentless progression, though not chaotic, not rushed. Each conquest, each campaign would unfold with precision and timing, like the slow turning of the seasons themselves. The first campaigns were near and familiar, against tribes and regions close to home. Western Xia, a kingdom in what is now northwestern China, became one of the first major targets. The Mongols moved deliberately, understanding the geography, the people, the defenses. Cities were surrounded, gates tested, walls observed. The conquests were brutal, yet methodical, with a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. There was destruction, certainly, but also the careful incorporation of skilled artisans, strategists, and traders into the growing empire. The pattern repeated itself, quietly, over and over. Every conquest added not just land, but knowledge, information, and experience. After subduing the Western Xia, Genghis Khan turned his attention to the powerful Jin dynasty in northern China. The walls of their cities were high, the soldiers disciplined, yet the Mongols had learned. They adapted, observing, testing, adjusting their methods. By 1215, Beijing had fallen, a testament not merely to force, but to the careful, persistent application of strategy and observation. The pace of conquest was deliberate, like a river carving a canyon over centuries. It was inevitable, steady, relentless in its slow unfolding. Then came the Khwarezmian Empire in Central Asia, a region of deserts, rivers, and cities that had grown rich through trade. In 1219, Genghis Khan sent envoys, emissaries to establish relations and safe passage. Their mission was simple, yet it was misunderstood and violently opposed. The envoys were executed. This act set in motion one of the most extensive and devastating campaigns of the Mongol Empire. From 1219 to 1221, the Mongol armies moved systematically, city by city, across the vast lands of Persia. Bukhara fell first, then Samarkand, Herat, and Merv. Each city surrendered or resisted. Each response met with calculated measures. Mass destruction followed, but not recklessly, not without consideration of logistics and survival. The Mongols moved with precision, as if the winds themselves guided their advance. In each city, the inhabitants witnessed an unfamiliar rhythm, the slow but unstoppable movement of a force that seemed almost natural, inevitable. Streets emptied, gates fell, and the empire expanded. Temujin, now Genghis Khan, observed from his camp, making decisions with a calm that was almost meditative. Every soldier, every messenger, every trader integrated into a system larger than themselves, contributing to the growing structure that stretched from the steppes to the deserts. And yet, despite the vastness, the empire remained connected, a network of communication, supply, and strategy that was extraordinary in its scope and careful in its execution. By 1221, the Khwarezmian Empire had collapsed. Its rulers fled, its cities had changed forever, and the Mongol influence extended farther than most could imagine. But Genghis Khan did not pause in reflection for long. The steppes remained restless, the northern forests and western deserts still untamed. There were campaigns to plan, alliances to reinforce, the steady growth of an empire that would not rush, but would not hesitate. The rhythm of the Mongol expansion was slow, deliberate, almost hypnotic, echoing the eternal patterns of wind and grass, river and stone, life and death across the open plains. And so, the story continues, the plains stretching endlessly, the horses' hooves imprinting the soft earth, the tents and fires flickering under the stars. The young boy from a broken family had risen, slowly, patiently, to become Genghis Khan. The empire had begun, quietly, methodically, inevitably, and its echoes would travel across continents, centuries, and generations. The story of these early years, of this rise, is a story that unfolds not in haste, but in the careful, measured passage of time, like the slow turning of the earth, the long whispers of the wind, and the endless shifting rhythm of the Mongol steppes. After the initial consolidation of the Mongol tribes under Genghis Khan, the empire began to extend its influence beyond the familiar steppes of Mongolia. The campaigns against Western Xia and the Jin dynasty provided experience, strategy, and confidence. The Mongol forces, trained in mobility, archery, and endurance, had become an unprecedented military power. Their horses, swift and resilient, carried riders across vast distances, allowing them to strike swiftly and unpredictably. Supply lines were maintained through careful planning, and communication between units relied on relay stations and mounted messengers. These networks allowed Genghis Khan to project power across regions previously thought unreachable by any single force. In 1219, the Mongol armies turned westward toward the Khwarezmian Empire. This empire, located in Central Asia, had grown wealthy from trade along the Silk Road, connecting Persia with China and the Mediterranean. The initial interaction with the Khwarezmian rulers involved diplomatic efforts, trade agreements, and emissaries sent by Genghis Khan. The mission was peaceful, intended to establish formal relations and ensure safe passage through the empire. Yet the envoys were executed in Otrar, a city in present-day Uzbekistan. The response of the Mongols was calculated, methodical, and severe. The invasion began with the siege of Bukhara, one of the empire's major cities. Mongol forces surrounded the city, employing tactics that combined psychological pressure with relentless attacks. The defenders were unprepared for the discipline and coordination of the Mongol troops. As the walls fell, many inhabitants were killed, while others were taken prisoner or incorporated into the Mongol administration. The destruction was not indiscriminate. Skilled artisans, engineers, and administrators were often spared and absorbed into the empire, enhancing its capacity to govern newly conquered territories. Following Bukhara, the Mongol army advanced to Samarkand, a city celebrated for its wealth and cultural significance. The siege lasted several months, testing both attackers and defenders. The Mongols adapted their tactics to the city's fortifications, employing siege engines and exploiting weaknesses in the walls. When Samarkand fell in 1220, it marked one of the first major examples of the Mongols' ability to combine terror with practical administration. Citizens who survived the siege often found themselves working under Mongol oversight, contributing to infrastructure, logistics, and trade networks that supported further conquests. The campaign continued through Herat and Merv, cities located in present-day Iran and Turkmenistan. In each case, the Mongols approached systematically. They assessed fortifications, gathered intelligence, and coordinated multi-pronged attacks. Resistance was met with overwhelming force, but administration followed, establishing order over the conquered population. The scale of destruction varied by city, often depending on the level of resistance encountered. Merv, for example, suffered extensive loss of life as the city resisted and the Mongols sought to make an example to discourage further defiance. The pattern was repeated across smaller settlements, towns, and strategic points, solidifying Mongol control across Central Asia. The effectiveness of these campaigns rested on discipline and strategy. Mongol units, organized into decimal structures of tens, hundreds, and thousands, allowed for flexible deployment. Leaders were selected based on merit, experience, and loyalty. Messages traveled across vast distances through mounted couriers, ensuring coordinated actions even when separated by hundreds of kilometers. This organizational structure enabled simultaneous operations across multiple cities, contributing to the rapid expansion of the empire. By 1221, the Khwarezmian Empire had collapsed entirely. Its ruler, Shah Muhammad II, fled westward, leaving cities to fall one by one. The Mongols secured trade routes, including sections of the Silk Road, which allowed them to control commerce and communication between East and West. This consolidation provided resources and intelligence necessary for further campaigns into the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and beyond. The pace of conquest was deliberate. Mongol strategy emphasized timing, resource management, and the careful integration of new territories. During these years, Genghis Khan's attention also turned to maintaining internal cohesion. The Mongol tribes, while united under his leadership, remained diverse and occasionally restless. Systems of loyalty, oath-taking, and punishment ensured obedience. Diplomacy was exercised with skill, balancing intimidation with alliances through marriage, trade, and political arrangements. Tribes integrated into the empire were often allowed to retain local customs and authority, provided they acknowledged Mongol supremacy and contributed troops or resources when required. The combination of military innovation and administrative foresight allowed the Mongol Empire to expand without immediate overextension. Armies moved swiftly across deserts, rivers, and mountains. Cavalry units could march hundreds of kilometers in days, sustaining operations far from their bases. Scouts and spies provided continuous intelligence on enemy movements, terrain, and potential hazards. The Mongols' ability to endure harsh conditions, from snow-covered passes to arid deserts, gave them a strategic advantage over sedentary armies unaccustomed to such mobility. The campaigns against Khwarezmian cities also demonstrated the psychological dimension of Mongol warfare. Reputation was carefully cultivated. Cities that surrendered peacefully were treated with relative leniency, while those that resisted faced destruction. Word of these outcomes spread quickly along trade routes and among neighboring states, contributing to the Mongols' reputation for efficiency and inevitability. This psychological impact complemented military strength, often reducing the need for prolonged sieges. During this period, Genghis Khan also implemented policies that would influence the empire for generations. Codified laws, known as the Yasa, provided guidelines for governance, military conduct, and civil behavior. These laws emphasized loyalty, military discipline, and adherence to authority, while allowing flexibility for local conditions. The Yasa created a uniform legal framework that helped maintain order across diverse and newly conquered populations. By the mid-1220s, the Mongol Empire had grown beyond the immediate steppes of Mongolia. Territories in northern China, Central Asia, and parts of Persia were under control, connected by communication lines, roads, and trade routes. This expansion set the stage for further campaigns westward into Europe, the Caucasus, and the Middle East. Genghis Khan's vision of a unified and disciplined empire had begun to take tangible shape, characterized by both strategic brilliance and the controlled use of force. The empire's expansion was not merely about territory or conquest. It was a system in which mobility, intelligence, and administration intertwined. Cities fell, but survivors were incorporated. Trade thrived, facilitated by the Mongol-controlled routes, allowing goods, ideas, and technology to flow across continents. The empire became a network, a slowly moving web of influence, power, and connectivity. By the end of these campaigns, the Mongol Empire had established a precedent in military history. It demonstrated that mobility, strategic planning, and disciplined leadership could achieve unprecedented expansion. Genghis Khan's methods, while often harsh, were systematic and calculated. Territories were subdued, populations integrated, and infrastructure maintained to support future campaigns. The rhythm of conquest, measured and deliberate, reflected both the harsh realities of the steppe and the long-term vision of the leader who had risen from adversity to command an empire that would stretch across continents and endure for generations. After the successful campaigns across Central Asia and Persia, the Mongol Empire continued to extend its influence steadily. The forces of Genghis Khan had reached the edges of the Khwarezmian territories, and their presence influenced not only political structures, but also the patterns of trade, communication, and culture. The routes connecting east and west became increasingly controlled, allowing for the movement of merchants, artisans, and soldiers. This integration of distant lands created a network that strengthened the Mongol Empire beyond immediate military victories. By the early 1220s, Genghis Khan began planning campaigns into regions farther west, including the lands that are now part of modern-day Russia, Georgia, and the Caucasus. The Mongol approach remained consistent: reconnaissance, careful assessment of terrain and local forces, and the use of highly mobile cavalry units capable of rapid deployment. Scouts moved ahead of the main armies, mapping routes, observing enemy positions, and preparing for strategic maneuvers. These measures allowed Mongol forces to maintain efficiency and control, even in unfamiliar territories with harsh winter conditions or rugged landscapes. The first notable engagements in this western expansion involved the Kingdom of Georgia. Mongol forces entered the region in 1221, engaging local armies in several battles that demonstrated both skill and organization. The Mongols exploited their superior mobility and archery techniques, moving in coordinated units to outflank and isolate opposing forces. Georgian cities, while fortified, faced sieges that emphasized persistence and timing. Resistance was met with calculated force, yet survivors were often integrated into administrative or logistical roles within the Mongol network. These campaigns reinforced a consistent pattern: conquest combined with organization, destruction balanced with incorporation, and careful attention to logistics that allowed further movements. By 1223, the Mongols had reached the southern steppes of what is now Russia. The Battle of the Kalka River stands out as a demonstration of Mongol strategy and psychological warfare. Russian princes and allied forces attempted to resist the advancing Mongol cavalry, but coordination among local forces proved insufficient against the disciplined Mongol units. The Mongols lured opposing troops into traps, used feigned retreats, and maintained constant pressure across the battlefield. Cities and villages along the rivers were either incorporated into Mongol control or neutralized to secure supply routes. This ensured that the empire's western frontier remained stable while allowing deeper penetration into Europe. During these years, internal administration became increasingly important. As the Mongol Empire expanded, leaders appointed by Genghis Khan managed newly conquered territories. These administrators maintained order, collected taxes, and coordinated further campaigns. Local populations were often allowed to continue traditional practices, provided they submitted to Mongol authority. The combination of autonomy with supervision created a system in which the empire could function over vast distances without relying solely on immediate military presence. The integration of skilled individuals into the Mongol administration strengthened governance while preserving efficiency. In addition to military campaigns, trade and communication were central to consolidation. The Mongols ensured that major routes connecting Central Asia, Persia, and Eastern Europe were secure. Caravanserai, relay stations, and messenger systems allowed messages, supplies, and travelers to move across the empire. This infrastructure not only supported military operations, but also facilitated economic growth, linking cities that had previously existed in relative isolation. Knowledge, technology, and culture spread along these routes, contributing to the cohesion of the empire beyond its immediate military achievements. After Genghis Khan's death in 1227, succession planning became critical to maintaining stability. His empire was divided among his sons and key generals. Ögedei Khan, the third son, assumed the position of Great Khan, overseeing the central administration while other family members managed distant territories. Batu Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan, was tasked with leading the western campaigns. These divisions allowed for simultaneous operations across multiple regions while maintaining overall cohesion. Each leader adhered to Mongol principles of merit, loyalty, and disciplined administration, which ensured continuity even as the empire became more complex. Batu Khan initiated the campaigns that would bring the Mongols deeper into Eastern Europe. In the late 1230s and early 1240s, Mongol forces moved into regions now part of Ukraine, Russia, and Hungary. Cities such as Kiev fell after sieges that combined both direct assault and psychological tactics. Resistance was met with overwhelming organization, emphasizing both speed and coordination. The Mongols often permitted partial surrender under strict conditions, integrating local leaders who agreed to tribute and service. This method allowed the empire to expand rapidly while maintaining functional control over new territories. The Mongol expansion also influenced cultural and political structures in the regions they conquered. Local rulers were often left in positions of authority if they accepted Mongol supremacy. Tribute systems were established, ensuring that wealth and resources flowed back to the central administration. Military conscription allowed local populations to contribute to further campaigns, creating a cycle of integration and reinforcement. Knowledge of Mongol organization, discipline, and communication became widely recognized, altering the expectations of local states and armies. As the empire expanded westward, Kublai and other descendants continued to build upon the foundations laid by Genghis Khan. The focus remained on disciplined military strategy, efficient administration, and controlled integration of conquered peoples. The Mongols' ability to move quickly across difficult terrain, combined with strategic use of intelligence and psychological tactics, allowed them to project power across regions that had been inaccessible to previous empires. The empire's communication networks, including relay stations and messenger systems, ensured coordination across thousands of kilometers, reinforcing central authority while enabling rapid responses to emerging threats. The Mongol presence in Eastern Europe and the Caucasus also had lasting economic effects. Trade along the Silk Road and other major routes became safer and more efficient under Mongol control. Caravans moved with less risk of attack, and cities along the routes benefited from the increased flow of goods, information, and people. Artisans, merchants, and scholars traveled across these regions, carrying knowledge of agriculture, medicine, and technology. The empire's expansion was not simply military. It was also a process of connecting disparate regions into a network of economic and cultural exchange. By the mid-1240s, the Mongol Empire had established itself as the largest contiguous land empire in history. Its forces stretched from the Pacific Ocean in the east to the Carpathian Mountains in the west, and from the Siberian forests in the north to the deserts of Persia in the south. This expansion was achieved through deliberate strategy, disciplined execution, and careful administration. The legacy of these campaigns influenced the regions involved for centuries, shaping political boundaries, trade routes, and cultural exchange long after the immediate conquests had passed. The consolidation of power across such vast areas required constant attention to detail. Governors and military commanders were expected to report regularly, maintain order, and coordinate with the central administration. Laws, codified under the Yasa, provided a uniform framework for governance, ensuring that both military and civil affairs followed clear principles. Local customs were respected where possible, but all communities were integrated into the overarching structure of the Mongol Empire. This system allowed the empire to remain cohesive despite its vast size and diversity of populations. Through these methods, the Mongols not only expanded their territory, but also created an enduring system of governance, trade, and cultural exchange. The campaigns into Eastern Europe, Russia, and the Caucasus demonstrated the effectiveness of mobility, intelligence, and organization. The Mongol Empire's growth was deliberate, calculated, and sustained, reflecting a balance between military conquest and administrative oversight. Cities were subdued, populations incorporated, and infrastructure maintained, allowing further campaigns to proceed efficiently. By the end of this phase of expansion, the Mongol Empire had transformed from a collection of nomadic tribes into a vast, interconnected network of territories. The combination of disciplined military strategy, innovative administration, and control over trade routes created a foundation for future generations. The legacy of these conquests would continue to influence regions across Asia and Europe, shaping the course of history for centuries to come. Following the death of Genghis Khan in 1227, the Mongol Empire faced a critical transition. Leadership passed to his third son, Ögedei Khan, who assumed the title of Great Khan. Ögedei's ascension marked the beginning of a new phase, one that emphasized consolidation, administration, and continued expansion while maintaining the systems established by Genghis Khan. The empire, stretching from the eastern steppes of Mongolia to the deserts of Persia, required meticulous attention to governance. Each territory, each city, each tribe needed to be integrated into the empire's structure to ensure stability and continuity. Ögedei inherited a highly organized military system. The decimal structure established by Genghis Khan divided the army into units of tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s, allowing for flexibility, coordination, and rapid deployment. Generals were appointed based on merit, loyalty, and experience rather than birthright alone. This approach strengthened the central authority while ensuring that distant regions remained connected to the core leadership. The Great Khan's orders could travel thousands of kilometers through relay stations, allowing him to respond to crises or coordinate campaigns without personally traveling to every battlefield. During Ögedei's reign, the Mongols focused on consolidating control over territories already conquered. In Persia and Central Asia, administrators implemented taxation systems and ensured that trade routes remained secure. Cities were integrated into the empire's infrastructure, maintaining local leadership where possible, but requiring tribute and military support. The Yasa, the codified law system established by Genghis Khan, provided uniform rules for governance, military conduct, and social order. These laws created a sense of predictability and structure across vast and diverse regions, reducing internal conflict and resistance. The empire's expansion continued under Ögedei, though at a deliberate pace. In 1235, the Mongols launched campaigns into northern China and the Korean peninsula. These operations involved careful reconnaissance, coordination between multiple army divisions, and strategic planning that accounted for terrain, weather, and local defenses. Mongol forces combined cavalry mobility with siege techniques adapted from previous campaigns, including the use of battering rams, catapults, and encirclement strategies. Cities that surrendered were incorporated peacefully, while those that resisted faced systematic pressure to comply. In addition to military campaigns, Ögedei emphasized infrastructure. Roads, relay stations, and supply lines were maintained and expanded, ensuring that messages, troops, and resources could move efficiently across the empire. The Silk Road, already influenced by Mongol control, became even more secure, facilitating trade and cultural exchange between East and West. Caravans of merchants, scholars, and artisans traveled under Mongol protection, moving goods, ideas, and knowledge across vast distances. This network strengthened the cohesion of the empire and enhanced its economic power. The administration of the Western territories, including Russia and the Caucasus, was assigned to trusted generals and family members. Batu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, continued campaigns into Eastern Europe, establishing what would later be known as the Golden Horde. The Mongols maintained control through a combination of military presence, taxation, and integration of local leaders who agreed to serve the empire. Cities such as Kiev, Vladimir, and Novgorod were brought under Mongol influence, contributing tribute and troops while retaining partial local autonomy. This approach allowed the empire to govern distant lands efficiently without overextending its resources. During Ögedei's reign, administrative centers were established in strategic locations. Karakorum, situated in central Mongolia, served as the political and cultural hub. Here, envoys, traders, and officials gathered, providing a point of coordination for the entire empire. Decisions made in Karakorum influenced regions thousands of kilometers away, from Persia in the west to the Chinese plains in the east. Ögedei's ability to govern effectively relied on the discipline of his subordinates, the loyalty of his generals, and the reliability of the communication networks established under Genghis Khan. Ögedei also focused on succession planning and internal stability. The Mongol Empire, composed of multiple tribes and diverse populations, could easily fragment without strong leadership. Regular councils and assemblies were held to maintain cohesion, resolve disputes, and reinforce the authority of the Great Khan. Military campaigns were scheduled with careful attention to the seasons, ensuring that armies could operate effectively while minimizing logistical challenges. The combination of governance, law, and planning created a balance between expansion and internal consolidation. In East Asia, the Mongols continued campaigns against the remnants of the Jin dynasty and other northern Chinese territories. Cities were surrounded and besieged, with defenders assessed for strength and potential negotiation. The Mongols' reputation for strategic efficiency preceded them, often causing cities to surrender without prolonged conflict. Those who resisted faced systematic and controlled military action, followed by incorporation of artisans, engineers, and administrators into the Mongol system. The empire's growth was as much about strategic integration as it was about conquest. Throughout the 1230s and 1240s, the Mongols strengthened their presence in the Middle East. The Ilkhanate, later established by Hulagu Khan, was prepared through careful planning, reconnaissance, and the gradual movement of troops into Persia and surrounding territories. Cities and fortresses were approached systematically, with intelligence gathered on defenses, supply lines, and terrain. This methodical approach minimized unnecessary losses and ensured that conquered regions could be administered effectively. The expansion into these territories reinforced the empire's role as a network connecting diverse cultures and economic systems. Ögedei's reign was also marked by cultural and economic initiatives. Diplomacy was encouraged, trade routes were secured, and artisans and scholars were moved across regions to support administrative and economic growth. Taxation systems were designed to extract resources efficiently while maintaining local stability. Infrastructure investments, including roads and relay stations, facilitated communication and trade, strengthening the empire's cohesion. The combination of military discipline, administration, and economic management allowed the Mongol Empire to remain stable despite its vast size. The consolidation of power under Ögedei set the stage for further expansion. Western Europe, Central Asia, and the Middle East were under increasing Mongol influence, and strategic planning continued for future campaigns. The empire's ability to coordinate distant armies, maintain communication, and integrate diverse populations ensured that expansion could proceed without immediate fragmentation. Ögedei's policies, combined with the foundations laid by Genghis Khan, created a system in which conquest, administration, and integration were intertwined. By the end of Ögedei Khan's reign in 1241, the Mongol Empire had reached its greatest cohesion. Territories across Asia and Eastern Europe were under control, trade routes were secured, and administrative systems ensured continuity and stability. The empire's expansion had slowed slightly, not due to weakness, but because consolidation and governance required careful attention. This balance between movement and management allowed the Mongol Empire to sustain its power over vast and diverse regions, preparing for the further developments that would follow under subsequent leaders.
Following the consolidation under Ögedei Khan, the Mongol Empire continued its expansion into Eastern Europe and China. Batu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, led campaigns in the western regions that would later form the foundation of the Golden Horde. This territory included parts of modern-day Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. Cities and settlements were brought under Mongol control through a combination of military conquest, diplomacy, and integration of local rulers who accepted Mongol authority. While some local leaders retained partial autonomy, they were required to provide tribute, troops, and logistical support to the empire. The Golden Horde established control over major Russian cities such as Kiev, Vladimir, and Novgorod. Siege warfare, combined with swift cavalry maneuvers, forced cities to comply, while those that resisted faced systematic military pressure. The Mongols used psychological tactics, spreading their reputation for efficiency and inevitability to minimize resistance. Trade routes within the Golden Horde were secured, ensuring the flow of goods, people, and information between Central Asia and Eastern Europe. These routes strengthened both economic and administrative cohesion across vast distances. During this period, the empire's administrative practices became increasingly sophisticated. Governors were appointed to oversee provinces, collect taxes, enforce laws, and coordinate with military commanders. The Yasa, Genghis Khan's codified legal system, provided consistency in governance, ensuring that both military and civil matters followed established principles. Local customs and practices were often respected, but all communities were integrated into the Mongol administrative framework. Skilled artisans, merchants, and engineers were relocated as needed to support infrastructure, governance, and trade. In China, the Mongols began campaigns that would culminate in the rise of Kublai Khan. The southern Song dynasty and northern territories required careful military planning due to their strong fortifications and large population centers. Mongol generals adapted their tactics to urban warfare, employing siege engines, surrounding cities, and cutting off supply lines. Resistance was met with force, but survivors who could contribute to the empire's administration, trade, or military were often spared. This approach ensured the expansion of the Mongol Empire while simultaneously consolidating the capacity to govern these complex regions. The Golden Horde also emphasized infrastructure and communication. Roads, relay stations, and secure caravan routes allowed messages, troops, and goods to travel efficiently across hundreds of kilometers. This network supported both military and economic objectives, enabling rapid deployment of forces to suppress rebellions or respond to threats. Trade caravans, protected by Mongol forces, facilitated the movement of silk, spices, precious metals, and knowledge between Europe and Asia. Cities along these routes grew in importance, serving as hubs of commerce and culture under Mongol supervision. Batu Khan's campaigns extended into the northern steppes, subduing nomadic tribes and securing borders. These operations required detailed planning, including reconnaissance of terrain, weather conditions, and enemy forces. Scouts and messengers provided real-time information, allowing Mongol units to maneuver with precision. Coordinated attacks, combined with the psychological impact of Mongol military reputation, minimized prolonged resistance.
Populations of conquered areas were incorporated into the empire, contributing to military campaigns, administration, and economic activity. Meanwhile, Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, focused on eastern expansion and consolidation in China. His campaigns involved crossing rivers, marshlands, and mountainous regions to reach fortified cities. The Mongols adapted siege technology learned from prior campaigns, employing catapults, battering rams, and coordinated assaults to overcome defenses. Cities that surrendered peacefully often retained local administration under Mongol oversight, ensuring continued economic production and social stability. The integration of Chinese scholars, engineers, and artisans enhanced governance, trade, and military efficiency, creating a system that could manage the complexities of large urban populations. The Mongol Empire, under both Batu and Kublai, continued to balance military conquest with governance. Laws codified under the Yasa ensured consistent standards across distant regions, while appointed governors managed day-to-day administration. Taxation systems were established to support the army and infrastructure, while trade networks were protected and expanded. Cultural exchange was encouraged, as artisans, scholars, and merchants moved freely across Mongol territories. Knowledge, technology, and ideas flowed along these routes, contributing to the long-term cohesion of the empire. The expansion of the Golden Horde influenced Europe as well. Mongol raids into Hungary, Poland, and the Balkans demonstrated both mobility and strategic discipline. Armies moved quickly, coordinated with intelligence gathered from scouts, and applied overwhelming force when necessary. The reputation of the Mongols often preceded them, causing cities and rulers to comply without extended conflict. While devastation occurred during resistance, those who submitted were incorporated into the system, ensuring the Mongols maintained both control and economic stability. In China, Kublai Khan's campaigns ultimately led to the foundation of the Yuan dynasty. By integrating Mongol administration with local Chinese practices, he established a government capable of managing vast populations and complex territories. Roads, canals, and communication networks allowed for efficient governance, while trade routes thrived under the protection of Mongol forces. Cities like Beijing became political and economic centers, linking Mongol authority to the broader East Asian region. The combination of military discipline, administrative oversight, and cultural integration allowed the empire to function effectively across diverse populations. Throughout this period, the Mongol Empire demonstrated a unique combination of military innovation and bureaucratic organization. Cavalry mobility, intelligence networks, psychological strategy, and disciplined leadership enabled rapid territorial expansion. Simultaneously, codified laws, administrative systems, and infrastructure development ensured that conquered territories were incorporated and managed effectively. The Golden Horde in Europe and Kublai Khan's territories in China exemplified this balance, showing that expansion was not merely conquest, but a comprehensive system of governance. By the mid-13th century, the Mongol Empire had reached its greatest geographic extent. The Golden Horde controlled much of Eastern Europe and the Russian steppes, while Kublai Khan consolidated power across China and Mongolia. Trade flourished along secure routes connecting east and west. Cultural exchange increased, and cities under Mongol control became hubs of administration and commerce. The empire's legacy during this period was characterized by both strategic military conquest and careful integration of diverse populations into a cohesive, functioning system. The careful balance between expansion, administration, and integration during the rise of the Golden Horde and Kublai Khan created a foundation that would influence history for centuries. The empire's achievements in mobility, governance, trade, and cultural exchange provided a model for future empires while leaving a lasting mark on the regions under its control. Through systematic organization, disciplined leadership, and strategic vision, the Mongol Empire maintained cohesion across vast territories, demonstrating the interplay between force, management, and planning.
After the consolidation of power in Eastern Europe and China, Mongol attention shifted to the Middle East. Persia, a region of rich culture, trade networks, and powerful cities, became a primary target for expansion. Hulagu Khan, another grandson of Genghis Khan, was assigned to lead campaigns into Persia and surrounding territories. These campaigns were meticulously planned, with armies divided into disciplined units capable of moving swiftly across diverse terrains, including mountains, deserts, and river valleys. Scouts and intelligence networks were deployed to map enemy positions, assess city defenses, and monitor supply lines. The Mongols approached each city with a combination of military precision and psychological strategy.
Cities that resisted faced long sieges, which were often accompanied by displays of military might to compel surrender. Fortifications were systematically breached using siege engines, battering rams, and other adapted technologies. The Mongols also employed coordinated attacks to cut off reinforcements and isolate strongholds. Those who surrendered peacefully were often integrated into the administrative system, providing skilled labor, tax revenue, and logistical support to the empire. One of the first major conquests was Baghdad in 1258, a city renowned for its cultural, scientific, and religious significance. The siege of Baghdad demonstrated the Mongols' capacity for overwhelming force combined with strategic planning. After penetrating the city's defenses, the Mongols carried out extensive destruction to eliminate potential resistance. While this conquest was devastating, survivors who could contribute to administration or trade were sometimes spared. The fall of Baghdad marked a turning point, signaling the Mongols' ability to control one of the most influential regions in the Islamic world. Hulagu Khan's campaigns continued westward, bringing large parts of Persia and Mesopotamia under Mongol control. Cities such as Tabriz, Maracay, and Isfahan were incorporated into the empire. Local rulers were either replaced by Mongol administrators or retained under strict oversight, ensuring compliance with imperial policies. Tribute systems were established to maintain a steady flow of resources to the central administration. These arrangements reinforced both economic stability and military readiness, allowing the Mongols to sustain operations across a vast region. During these campaigns, the Mongols adapted their military strategies to the local environment. Desert and mountain warfare required careful logistical planning to provide water, food, and shelter for horses and soldiers. Units moved in coordination, maintaining communication through messengers and relay stations. Intelligence gathering was continuous, ensuring that any potential uprisings or enemy movements could be countered swiftly. The combination of adaptability, mobility, and disciplined leadership allowed the Mongols to subdue territories that had resisted previous empires. The Ilkhanate, formally established under Hulagu Khan, became the administrative and political center for Mongol-controlled Persia. Governance relied on a hierarchy of officials, combining Mongol leadership with local expertise. Taxation was systematized, law and order were maintained, and military garrisons secured strategic locations. The Yasa provided a legal framework, while adaptations were made to accommodate local customs and religious practices. This integration helped the Mongols maintain control without excessive reliance on force, creating a stable foundation for long-term governance. Trade and communication networks flourished under Mongol rule. The Silk Road and other trade routes passing through Persia were secured and monitored. Merchants, travelers, and envoys moved safely across vast distances, facilitating the exchange of goods, technology, and knowledge. Cities along these routes prospered, serving as commercial and cultural hubs. The Mongol administration recognized the value of these connections, ensuring that economic activity supported both local prosperity and imperial power. Religious and cultural adaptation played a role in maintaining stability. While the Mongols initially practiced their traditional beliefs, they tolerated local religions, including Islam, Christianity, and Buddhism. Religious leaders were often allowed to continue their work under Mongol supervision, contributing to social cohesion and local compliance. Artisans, scholars, and engineers were relocated as needed to support infrastructure, architecture, and urban planning, reinforcing the empire's integration of diverse populations. The military presence in Persia was complemented by strategic fortifications. Cities and towns were reinforced, watchtowers were built along key routes, and garrisons ensured rapid response to rebellion or invasion. Supply depots and communication stations allowed the Mongol administration to coordinate across hundreds of kilometers. These measures allowed Hulagu Khan to maintain control over territories that had been politically fragmented for centuries, transforming Persia into a coherent and manageable region within the Mongol Empire. The Ilkhanate also served as a staging ground for further campaigns into the Levant and neighboring regions. The Mongols projected power into Syria, Armenia, and Anatolia, often collaborating with local allies or taking advantage of political fragmentation. Each campaign was meticulously prepared, with attention to logistics, terrain, and seasonal considerations. Cities along the routes were either neutralized, integrated, or fortified to support the movement of troops and supplies. This systematic approach minimized unnecessary losses while maximizing strategic effectiveness. Despite the efficiency of Mongol rule, resistance occasionally emerged. Local uprisings, rival dynasties, and remnants of previous empires posed intermittent challenges. The Mongols responded swiftly, using a combination of military force, negotiation, and administrative adjustments to neutralize threats. These measures ensured that the Ilkhanate remained stable while allowing the empire to focus on expansion, trade, and cultural integration. The ability to balance control and adaptability was a hallmark of Mongol governance in Persia. By the end of Hulagu Khan's campaigns, the Ilkhanate had become a central pillar of the Mongol Empire. Persia was unified under Mongol administration, trade networks flourished, cities were integrated into imperial systems, and military forces maintained security across vast territories. The combination of conquest, administration, infrastructure, and cultural adaptation demonstrated the empire's ability to govern complex and diverse regions effectively. The Ilkhanate's foundation ensured that the Mongols maintained influence in the Middle East for decades, shaping politics, economics, and society long after the initial campaigns. The Mongol conquest of Persia exemplified the balance between destruction and integration. Cities were subdued, populations incorporated, and resources managed efficiently. Strategic planning, disciplined armies, and effective administration allowed the empire to project power across one of the most challenging regions in the known world. The legacy of these campaigns continued to influence trade, culture, and governance, solidifying the Mongol Empire's reputation as the largest contiguous land empire in history.
Following the consolidation of Persia under the Ilkhanate, the Mongols extended their campaigns into the Levant, Syria, and parts of Anatolia. Hulagu Khan aimed to secure further territory and influence, consolidating the empire's western frontier. The Mongols relied on their traditional strategy of mobility, reconnaissance, and psychological pressure. Cavalry units moved rapidly across open plains and mountain passes, coordinated with intelligence gathered by scouts. Armies were divided into disciplined units, capable of executing complex maneuvers in coordination with siege forces. The Mongols approached fortified cities with careful planning. Walls, gates, and defenses were assessed through both scouting and prior intelligence. Siege engines, catapults, and battering rams were prepared for prolonged operations, while surrounding terrain was used strategically to isolate targets. Some cities surrendered after learning of the Mongols' reputation, while others resisted, facing systematic and overwhelming force. Conquered populations were often incorporated into administrative and military systems, providing labor, resources, and recruits for future campaigns. One of the key points of tension during this period was the confrontation with the Mamluks of Egypt and Syria. The Mamluk Sultanate, a well-trained and disciplined military force, controlled Egypt, parts of Syria, and the Levantine corridor. The Mongols advanced toward Aleppo and Damascus, expecting swift victories, but encountered organized resistance. The Mamluks combined knowledge of terrain, fortified cities, and disciplined infantry with limited cavalry to slow Mongol advances. Despite the Mongols' superior mobility, sieges became more challenging, requiring adaptation and careful allocation of resources. The Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260 marked a significant turning point. Mongol forces, divided and extending far from their supply lines, faced the Mamluks in a decisive engagement. The Mamluks, led by Sultan Qutuz and General Baybars, used intelligence, feigned retreats, and concentrated cavalry strikes to exploit Mongol weaknesses. The Mongols, though highly disciplined and mobile, were forced to withdraw, halting further western expansion. This battle demonstrated that Mongol dominance, while formidable, was not absolute and could be challenged under favorable conditions. While Western campaigns faced limitations, the Ilkhanate continued consolidating control over Persia and surrounding regions. Administrative systems were strengthened, with appointed governors overseeing taxation, law enforcement, and military coordination. The Yasa provided a legal framework, while local customs were incorporated to maintain compliance. Infrastructure, including roads, supply depots, and relay stations, allowed the Mongols to respond to internal uprisings and external threats efficiently. Trade and commerce were encouraged, providing both economic stability and resources to support military operations. The Mongols' interaction with local populations in the Levant and Mesopotamia was complex. Religious tolerance was maintained, allowing Muslims, Christians, and Jews to practice their faiths under supervision. Skilled artisans, engineers, and scholars were often relocated to assist with construction, administration, and military engineering. Cities that surrendered peacefully were integrated into the empire's network, contributing to economic activity and stability. Those who resisted were subdued, with strategic destruction to prevent future opposition. Throughout these campaigns, logistics remained a central concern. Armies operating far from their core territories required careful planning for water, food, and forage for horses. Seasonal considerations dictated the timing of operations, ensuring that troops were not overextended during winter or drought. Supply lines were fortified, and messengers provided constant updates on enemy positions and movements. This attention to logistics allowed the Mongols to sustain extended campaigns across challenging terrain and hostile regions.
The Mongols also sought to project influence diplomatically. Envoys were sent to regional powers to negotiate alliances, trade agreements, and submission. Some local rulers agreed to vassalage, providing tribute and military support while retaining nominal authority. This approach allowed the Mongols to extend influence without the need for continuous military occupation, reducing the strain on resources while maintaining control over distant territories. In Anatolia, Mongol forces moved into territories of the Seljuk Sultanate, seeking to secure strategic passes and towns. Armies utilized both mobility and siege capabilities, often relying on coordination with allied or compliant local forces. The Mongols reinforced their control by establishing garrisons, appointing administrators, and integrating local elites into the empire's structure. These measures ensured stability in regions that could have otherwise been sources of rebellion or resistance. Trade and cultural exchange flourished despite ongoing military operations. Caravan routes connecting Persia, the Levant, and Anatolia were monitored and protected. Merchants, travelers, and scholars moved relatively safely under Mongol supervision, facilitating the flow of goods, knowledge, and technology. Cities along these routes grew in significance, becoming hubs of commerce, governance, and cultural interaction. This network strengthened the Mongol Empire's cohesion, providing resources and intelligence for both administration and military planning. While the Mongols did not achieve total domination in the Middle East, their presence reshaped the political and economic landscape. The Ilkhanate emerged as a powerful and organized entity, maintaining control over Persia and influencing neighboring regions. Military campaigns, infrastructure development, and administrative systems ensured that the Mongols could project power effectively, even when facing formidable opponents like the Mamluks. The balance of force, diplomacy, and governance allowed the empire to remain stable across diverse and challenging regions. By the late 1260s, the Mongol Empire in the Middle East had reached a balance of expansion and consolidation. The Ilkhanate controlled Persia, parts of Mesopotamia, and strategic routes into Anatolia and the Levant. Resistance from the Mamluks and other local powers limited further western expansion, but did not destabilize the region under Mongol control. Administrative systems, trade networks, and military infrastructure maintained cohesion, allowing the empire to function effectively across vast and diverse territories. The campaigns in the Middle East highlighted the Mongol Empire's ability to adapt to new environments, face organized opposition, and integrate conquered populations. Military discipline, strategic planning, infrastructure, and administration were all applied in combination, demonstrating the empire's capacity for long-term governance beyond simple conquest. The legacy of these operations influenced politics, commerce, and culture in the region for decades, establishing the Ilkhanate as a central component of Mongol power.
Following decades of conquest and consolidation across Asia, the Mongols turned their attention fully to China. Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, focused on unifying the vast and fragmented territories of northern and southern China. The Song dynasty controlled the south, while the Jin dynasty had previously held the north before falling to Mongol campaigns. The process of unification required both sustained military effort and sophisticated administration. Kublai Khan adapted Mongol strategies to the geographic and political challenges of China, combining mobility, siege tactics, and governance. The Mongol campaigns in China were extensive. Northern cities, often walled and well-defended, were systematically approached. Scouts mapped fortifications, supply lines, and terrain. Armies moved in coordinated units, using cavalry for rapid strikes and infantry to manage sieges. Siege engines, battering rams, and catapults were employed when necessary, but often the reputation of Mongol force prompted surrender without prolonged combat. Cities that resisted were subdued with decisive action, and survivors who could contribute to governance, trade, or infrastructure were integrated into the Mongol system. Kublai Khan emphasized logistics and planning. Armies traversed rivers, marshlands, and mountains, requiring detailed knowledge of terrain and seasonal conditions. Supply lines were fortified, and relay stations ensured messages, provisions, and reinforcements could move efficiently across vast distances. The Mongols adapted to local conditions, sometimes employing Chinese engineers to improve siege techniques, roads, and communication networks. These efforts allowed the Mongols to maintain sustained campaigns over long periods, minimizing attrition while maximizing territorial control. The fall of the Southern Song dynasty in 1279 marked the completion of Mongol unification of China. Kublai Khan established the Yuan dynasty, formalizing Mongol rule over the entire region. The Yuan dynasty integrated Mongol governance with Chinese administrative practices,
Local officials and scholars were incorporated into the bureaucracy, ensuring that the empire could manage vast populations while maintaining central authority. Taxation, law enforcement, and military oversight were systematized, creating a framework that allowed effective control across the empire. Cultural integration was an important aspect of Mongol administration. While the Mongols retained their traditional customs, they respected and incorporated Chinese cultural practices. Confucian scholars were employed in administration, engineers and artisans contributed to urban development, and trade networks were strengthened. Cities such as Beijing and Xi'an became major political, economic, and cultural centers, linking Mongol authority with Chinese governance systems. This approach helped maintain stability and fostered prosperity under Yuan rule. The Mongols implemented policies to manage social hierarchy and ethnic divisions. Mongols were placed in positions of power, but local Chinese, Koreans, and other populations were allowed roles within the administrative framework. This structure reinforced Mongol dominance while utilizing local expertise. Legal codes adapted from both Yasa and Chinese precedent provided consistency in governance and established clear rules for conduct, taxation, and military service. This combination of Mongol authority and local knowledge ensured the smooth operation of the empire. Trade flourished under Mongol control. The Yuan dynasty secured and expanded key trade routes, including sections of the Silk Road that traversed China and connected to Central Asia. Caravans carrying silk, spices, precious metals, and other goods traveled under Mongol protection. Merchants, scholars, and travelers moved relatively safely across long distances, facilitating economic growth and cultural exchange. Cities along these routes became hubs of commerce, administration, and intellectual activity, further integrating the empire. The Mongols maintained a strong military presence throughout China. Garrisons were stationed in strategic cities and along major trade routes. Cavalry units patrolled vast plains, while infantry supported urban and defensive operations. The Mongol army incorporated Chinese engineers and local expertise, improving siege technology and fortifications. Military discipline and rapid mobility allowed the Mongols to respond to internal uprisings and external threats efficiently, preserving stability throughout the Yuan dynasty. Infrastructure development was a central priority. Roads, canals, and bridges were constructed or maintained to facilitate trade, communication, and military movement. Relay stations allowed rapid transmission of messages and provisions. Cities were connected through a network of administrative and transportation systems that ensured central authority could extend across thousands of kilometers. This emphasis on infrastructure strengthened cohesion and allowed the Mongol administration to govern effectively over vast and diverse populations. The Mongols also encouraged cultural and intellectual exchange. Scholars, artisans, and engineers were relocated as needed to support urban planning, architecture, and governance. Religious tolerance was maintained, allowing Buddhism, Taoism, Islam, and Christianity to coexist under supervision. These policies reduced social friction and allowed the Mongols to focus on administration, economic development, and military security. The Yuan dynasty became a center for both governance and cultural synthesis, demonstrating the Mongols' capacity for long-term rule beyond conquest. Despite these successes, challenges persisted. Resistance from local populations occasionally flared, requiring military intervention or negotiation. Regional governors sometimes sought greater autonomy, and coordination across distant territories demanded constant attention. Kublai Khan maintained a careful balance of authority, relying on centralized administration, loyal Mongol officials, and integration of local expertise to manage potential unrest. This strategy preserved stability while enabling continued development and trade. By the end of Kublai Khan's reign, the Yuan dynasty had solidified Mongol control over China. Military campaigns, administrative systems, infrastructure, and cultural integration ensured the dynasty functioned effectively over an enormous territory. Trade networks thrived, cities flourished, and governance systems balanced Mongol authority with local expertise. The combination of conquest, administration, and integration exemplified the Mongol Empire's approach to empire building, demonstrating a capacity for long-term rule beyond immediate military dominance. The Yuan dynasty's establishment marked a high point of Mongol achievement in East Asia. The integration of Chinese administrative practices with Mongol authority allowed the empire to manage complex populations and maintain cohesion across vast distances. Roads, communication networks, and trade routes ensured both economic growth and military readiness. Cultural exchange and tolerance supported stability, while military discipline provided security. This period exemplified the Mongols' ability to govern as effectively as they could conquer, leaving a lasting legacy in China and across Asia.
After decades of expansion and consolidation, the Mongol Empire began to face internal and external pressures that contributed to its gradual decline. Succession disputes arose frequently among the descendants of Genghis Khan, as different branches of the family claimed authority over vast territories. These conflicts weakened central control, as regional khanates began to assert autonomy. Coordination across distant regions became increasingly difficult, and communication delays slowed decision-making, allowing local leaders to act independently. The Golden Horde in Eastern Europe experienced internal struggles over succession. Rival claimants to leadership fought for control, occasionally leading to civil conflict. These disputes reduced military cohesion and created opportunities for local rulers and neighboring powers to resist Mongol influence. While tribute and taxation systems remained in place, enforcement became more inconsistent, weakening the economic foundation of the Khanate. External pressures, including rising Russian principalities, challenged Mongol dominance in the region, gradually reducing their authority over formerly subjugated cities. In the Ilkhanate of Persia, similar succession and internal governance issues arose. Following the death of Hulagu Khan, disputes among his descendants led to fragmentation of authority. Regional governors and military commanders increasingly acted autonomously, and loyalty to the central Ilkhanate diminished. Economic stability was further strained by internal conflicts, disruptions to trade routes, and occasional famines. The administrative system, while initially robust, struggled to maintain uniformity across diverse territories. As a result, the Ilkhanate's influence gradually waned, and former vassal states asserted greater independence. In China, the Yuan dynasty under the successors of Kublai Khan faced challenges from within and from external forces. Mongol rulers increasingly relied on a complex bureaucracy and local Chinese officials to manage the empire. While this system allowed for continued administration, it also created tensions between Mongol elites and local administrators. Corruption, inefficiency, and resistance among regional leaders weakened central authority. Additionally, natural disasters, crop failures, and epidemics contributed to social unrest. Peasant uprisings, including the Red Turban Rebellion, challenged Mongol control and highlighted the growing fragility of the dynasty. The fragmentation of the empire into separate khanates, Golden Horde, Ilkhanate, Chagatai Khanate, and Yuan dynasty, meant that the Mongol Empire no longer functioned as a single unified entity. Each khanate pursued its own policies, sometimes cooperating, but often competing for influence and resources. Diplomatic relations between the khanates were uneven, with occasional conflicts over borders, trade, and succession disputes. This lack of centralized coordination reduced the military and political power that had allowed the Mongols to dominate such vast territories. Trade, once a unifying element across the empire, faced increasing disruption. Although the Silk Road and other trade routes remained active, instability in key regions led to greater risks for merchants and travelers. Some routes were abandoned or diverted due to local conflicts or the decline of central authority. Cities that had thrived under Mongol protection experienced reduced commerce, population decline, and occasional abandonment. Cultural and intellectual exchange continued, but at a diminished scale, as security and administrative oversight became less reliable. Military capability, once the empire's greatest strength, also declined. Cavalry forces that had enabled rapid conquest became harder to maintain across fragmented territories. Recruitment, training, and logistics suffered from inconsistent leadership and internal disputes. Fortifications, previously strengthened and maintained, fell into disrepair. Local uprisings could not always be suppressed effectively, and external threats from emerging powers increasingly challenged Mongol authority. The once formidable reputation of Mongol invincibility began to erode. Environmental factors compounded these challenges. Droughts, floods, and famines affected agricultural production, particularly in Persia and China. These conditions strained resources, leading to food shortages and population displacement. The administrative systems, which relied on taxation and tribute, struggled to adapt to these crises. Public dissatisfaction grew, fueling unrest and rebellion. The combination of environmental stress and political instability accelerated the decline of Mongol control in many regions. The Mongol Khanates also faced the rise of neighboring powers. In Eastern Europe, the Grand Duchy of Moscow began consolidating power, gradually resisting the Golden Horde and expanding its territory. In Persia, local dynasties and emerging empires challenged Ilkhanate authority. In China, the Ming dynasty rose to power, ultimately overthrowing the Yuan dynasty in 1368.
These new powers capitalized on Mongol weaknesses, filling political and economic voids left by the empire's fragmentation. Cultural integration and administrative innovation, which had been strengths of the Mongol Empire, also became sources of tension. Mongol rulers in China relied on Chinese officials, while in Persia, local elites gained greater influence. Conflicts of interest and divided loyalties created friction within governance structures. The balance between Mongol authority and local administration became increasingly difficult to maintain, reducing the efficiency of taxation, law enforcement, and military coordination. By the late 14th century, the Mongol Empire had ceased to function as a unified entity. Its former territories were divided among independent khanates, each following its own trajectory. The Golden Horde fragmented into smaller states. The Il Khanate dissolved. The Chagatai Khanate split into western and eastern regions, and the Yuan dynasty was replaced by the Ming dynasty in China. The legacy of the empire persisted in trade networks, cultural exchange, and military innovations, but political unity was no longer achievable. The decline of the Mongol Empire illustrates the challenges of maintaining authority over vast and diverse territories. Succession disputes, administrative fragmentation, economic disruptions, military limitations, environmental stress, and the rise of neighboring powers all contributed to the empire's gradual dissolution. Despite its fragmentation, the Mongol Empire left a lasting impact on the regions it once controlled, shaping political, economic, and cultural development for centuries. Even in decline, the Mongols influenced governance structures, urban development, and trade networks across Eurasia. Cities and trade routes established during Mongol rule continued to facilitate commerce and cultural exchange. Military strategies, administrative practices, and legal systems influenced successor states and regional powers. The empire's legacy endured, not through political unity, but through the structural and cultural frameworks it had created across a vast and interconnected world.
Even after the fragmentation of the Mongol Empire into separate khanates, the influence of Mongol governance, trade networks, and cultural exchange persisted for centuries. Across Eurasia, roads, bridges, and caravan routes constructed during Mongol rule continued to facilitate commerce and communication. The Silk Road remained active, connecting China, Persia, Central Asia, and Europe. Merchants transported silk, spices, metals, and other goods across vast distances, ensuring that the economic structures established by the Mongols endured even as political authority waned. Cultural exchange flourished along these trade networks. Artists, engineers, scholars, and craftsmen traveled freely, spreading techniques, knowledge, and innovations. Architectural styles, literary works, and scientific ideas moved between regions, creating a web of shared cultural development. The movement of technologies, such as gunpowder, papermaking, and medical knowledge, was accelerated by the stability provided by Mongol infrastructure. Cities that had thrived under Mongol rule continued to serve as centers of commerce and learning, benefiting from the organizational and administrative systems implemented during the empire's height. The Mongols also influenced military strategies and organization in the regions they controlled. Cavalry tactics, coordination of units across large territories, and siege engineering were adopted and adapted by successor states. Armies learned to integrate mobility with discipline, combining traditional regional forces with methods observed from Mongol campaigns. Even after direct Mongol rule ended, these strategies shaped military thinking and operations in Persia, China, and Eastern Europe for generations. Administrative practices developed by the Mongols left a lasting mark on governance. Centralized control balanced with local autonomy, standardized taxation, and integrated legal systems became models for later states. The use of both Mongol leaders and local officials ensured continuity and stability while facilitating adaptation to regional conditions. Successor states in Persia, Central Asia, and China drew upon these practices to organize bureaucracies, manage resources, and maintain law and order, demonstrating the enduring utility of Mongol innovations in governance. Religious tolerance, a key feature of Mongol rule, influenced subsequent policies in many regions. Mongol rulers allowed diverse faiths, including Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, and Taoism, to coexist under supervision. This tolerance reduced internal conflict and facilitated social cohesion. The integration of religious communities into administrative and economic life helped maintain stability and contributed to cultural richness. Even after the decline of direct Mongol control, religious diversity continued to flourish in areas that had been under Mongol influence. The Mongol Empire's impact on demographics was significant.
Forced migrations, relocations of artisans, and the movement of populations during campaigns reshaped the composition of cities and regions. New communities emerged, blending Mongol, Chinese, Persian, and Central Asian cultural elements. Trade, intermarriage, and administrative relocations contributed to ethnic and cultural mixing that persisted beyond the empire's political existence. Urban centers grew in population and diversity, reflecting the empire's integration of peoples across continents. Economically, the Mongols left a lasting imprint on commerce. Standardized weights and measures, secured trade routes, and efficient postal systems enhanced long-distance trade. Markets in cities such as Beijing, Tabriz, Samarkand, and Baghdad continued to operate effectively, fostering commercial growth. Merchants and artisans benefited from the infrastructure, legal frameworks, and relative security established under Mongol administration. The movement of luxury goods, technology, and ideas across regions contributed to economic development and global interconnectedness. The Mongols' influence extended into science and technology. Scholars and engineers relocated across the empire, sharing knowledge of astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and engineering. Observatories, libraries, and workshops supported research and innovation. Techniques in metallurgy, irrigation, architecture, and military engineering spread widely, creating a foundation for later scientific and technological advances. The integration of diverse knowledge systems facilitated cross-cultural learning and the preservation of expertise across vast territories. The legacy of the Mongol Empire is also evident in political and diplomatic history. The concept of a vast empire, connecting disparate regions under a single framework, inspired later rulers and state builders. Diplomatic envoys, intelligence networks, and communication systems introduced during Mongol rule influenced the conduct of interstate relations. Alliances, tribute arrangements, and negotiated settlements demonstrated sophisticated governance that shaped the development of subsequent empires and kingdoms. Despite the eventual decline of Mongol authority, their cultural and historical imprint endured. Urban planning, trade infrastructure, administrative systems, military techniques, and religious tolerance left lasting impressions across Eurasia. Cities maintained economic vitality, trade networks continued to connect distant regions, and cultural exchange enriched artistic, literary, and scientific traditions. Successor states in China, Persia, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe inherited and adapted these structures, ensuring that Mongol influence extended long after the empire's political unity dissolved. Even in modern times, the Mongol Empire's impact is visible. Historical scholarship, archaeological findings, and surviving infrastructure reveal the extent of their reach. Cultural traditions, urban layouts, and trade patterns in many regions trace their origins to the Mongol period. Military strategies and administrative principles developed during Mongol rule influenced later empires, contributing to political and economic stability in successor states. The memory of Mongol conquests and governance continues to shape historical understanding, demonstrating the enduring legacy of one of history's largest empires. The Mongol Empire, once unified under Genghis Khan and his successors, demonstrated a capacity for both destruction and integration. Cities were conquered, populations incorporated, and trade networks secured. Military discipline, administrative innovation, and cultural adaptation allowed the empire to govern vast territories effectively. Even after fragmentation into separate khanates, the systems, infrastructure, and cultural exchange established during Mongol rule continued to influence regions across Eurasia. The Mongols' legacy endures in commerce, governance, culture, and history, a testament to the empire's remarkable achievements and lasting impact.